Do you really believe you'll find your life's purpose just by saying positive affirmations in the mirror? While you keep repeating, "I am light, I am peace," there's a part of you that's screaming, and you silence it again and again. But what if I told you that your true purpose is hidden inside that muffled scream, in your suppressed anger, in the jealousy you pretend not to feel, in the fear you disguise as confidence? The biggest lie they told you is that you need to get rid of your darkness to become a better person. Carl Jung proved the opposite. It's when you dive into it, when you face it head-on, that true awakening begins. There is no growth without discomfort, no healing without confrontation, and above all, no purpose without shadow. Your dark side is not the villain in your story. It's the map. And maybe, just maybe, everything you're searching for is already there, behind the masks, beneath the persona, hidden inside what you try hardest to suppress. This video is for those who are tired of easy answers, and for those who feel deep down that it's time to stop running from themselves, because it's not about finding a new path, it's about finally stopping the habit of abandoning who you really are. The myth of a grand purpose. For a long time, we were sold the idea that purpose had to be something grand, spectacular, almost cinematic, as if there were a brightly lit stage just waiting for the protagonist to arrive. And of course, that protagonist was supposed to be you, as long as you discovered your big reason for existing. But this narrative, while romantic, is also dangerous. It feeds a kind of ego dressed up as enlightenment, an ego that refuses to accept that maybe your true purpose isn't to create something epic, but simply to learn how to live with presence. Carl Jung warned us about the dangers of identifying with inflated archetypes, the savior, the hero, the chosen one. And when the ego clings to those fantasies, what should be a journey becomes a burden. People feel frustrated for not having found their gift, as if they failed the universe. But what if purpose isn't something out there? What if it lives in the silence of small, everyday actions? What if cooking with care, listening with love, or saying no with firmness are spiritual expressions of the self in action? The obsession with a spectacular purpose ends up creating a block, the constant need to compare. If I'm not like so-and-so who founded a non-profit, does my life even matter? That's the trap of the persona. That mask we wear to seem important, enlightened, special. But purpose isn't a performance. It's the reflection of inner alignment, often revealed in moments invisible to others. It's the gardener who tends the apartment building's plants so lovingly that he shifts the energy of everyone passing by. It's the single mother who, even exhausted, creates an emotionally safe space for her kids. It's the cashier who treats each customer like family. These gestures don't make headlines, but they are deeply spiritual. True spirituality is subtle. And that's exactly why purpose often feels absent, because it doesn't shout, it whispers. Ego, shadow, and the inner calling. When the inner calling begins to rise, it rarely arrives with flowers and applause. More often, it comes wrapped in discomfort, restlessness, even a faint sense of existential panic. It's that feeling that something inside you is imploding, as if your soul is knocking on the door, but your ego refuses to open it. Carl Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when we are invited to acknowledge the parts of ourselves we've always avoided. The ego, vain and controlling, hates this process. It clings to the story that we're good, right, superior. But real awakening requires a brutally honest look within, and that hurts. The inner calling is often not inspiration, it's rupture, it's a crisis. It's when the persona starts to crack, when the image you built to please the world begins to dissolve, and what remains is neither pretty nor marketable, but it's real. This moment is like walking through a mirror. On one side is the character you created to be accepted. On the other is the being you've always been, but hid for fear of not being loved. That's when the confusion starts. Am I this polished version or this distorted reflection? The ego screams, "Don't change, stay here, we're in control." But the shadow whispers, "Come see me, I am you too." It's in this silent struggle that true spirituality begins. And it's far from glamorous. Sometimes it looks like crying in the shower, losing your way, feeling anger with no clear source. But it's also about allowing yourself to see deeply what lies beneath those emotions. The archetype of the seeker, the one who leaves the old world in search of the self, is born in doubt. And what's most surprising, this calling often shows up in the most ordinary situations. A frustrating conversation, a job that's lost its meaning, a sadness with no name. All of them are signs that the ego can no longer sustain the illusion. Most people ignore this calling because it threatens their emotional comfort zone. They'd rather keep performing happiness on social media than face their inner chaos. But that choice has consequences. The ego takes over the wheel, and the self gets buried under layers of masks and obligations. Jung warned us, what is not integrated becomes fate. Meaning, if you don't face your shadow, it begins to direct your life from within, sabotaging relationships, decisions, dreams. Real spirituality begins at the exact point where you find the courage to stop running from yourself. And no, it doesn't have to be mystical. You can start small, write out your irritations uncensored, observe your triggers, talk to someone you trust about what's been bothering you, one step at a time. And believe me, the more you listen to that inner calling, the clearer it becomes that there's a specific kind of work waiting for you. The work with your own shadow. The shadow work. Doing shadow work is not about eliminating your darkness. It's about sitting down with it and asking, what are you trying to show me? And that question alone can be terrifying because it demands humility, presence, and most of all, a willingness to stop identifying solely with the good version of yourself. The shadow, according to Carl Jung, isn't evil in itself. It's everything you've had to suppress in order to survive socially. Anger, vanity, envy, sensuality, repressed impulses, fear of failure. All the traits that didn't fit into your acceptable persona. But what you repress controls you from the shadows. That's why shadow work is about stopping the act. It's about ending the denial of the parts of you that you've hidden. And that process is neither quick nor pretty, it's raw. Sometimes it means admitting you manipulate. Sometimes it means seeing where you've sabotaged yourself. But once the shadow is named, it loses its grip. And here's a crucial point. You don't do shadow work floating in the air. It needs to be grounded. It has to show up in your real life. A simple starting point is to observe your repetitive patterns, especially the ones that lead to suffering. If you keep attracting emotionally unavailable people, maybe you're replaying an abandonment wound. If you constantly sabotage opportunities, maybe success scares you more than failure. Shadow work begins with those uncomfortable questions. Writing them in a journal is already a powerful ritual. Another practice is the mirror. Look into your own eyes for a few minutes without judgment and ask, who's there? It may sound silly, but it's deeply unsettling. The shadow doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be seen. But of course, the ego resists. It will try to convince you that you're already evolved enough, rationalize everything. But the self isn't interested in your ego's evolution. It wants integration. And integration doesn't happen during a retreat or after reading a mystical book. It's built in the mundane, in the yes you say when you meant no, in the criticism you voiced and later regretted, in that sense of emptiness that creeps in even after praise. All of that is raw material for shadow work. And contrary to what many believe, it doesn't weaken you, it frees you. Because when you embrace your shadow, you reclaim your power. the power to choose, to be present, to be real. The archetype of the wounded healer teaches us this, that our pain can be the path, that what we've avoided most can become a source of deep wisdom. But to access that wisdom, you need emotional courage, not to fight, but to hold your gaze. And when that gaze is steady, a different kind of pain begins to surface, one that doesn't paralyze, but reveals, one that points not only to the shadow, but to something even deeper, the rediscovery of your essence, the pain of knowing yourself. Self-knowledge isn't a shiny achievement, it's a passage. And more often than not, it hurts before it heals. The deeper someone dives into their own soul, the more they realize how much of their life was shaped by other people's expectations. The individuation process, as Carl Jung described it, isn't a path to becoming someone special. It's a path to unbecoming what you never truly were. And that strips away everything. It strips away friendships, labels, illusions. The pain of self-knowledge lies in this visceral kind of detachment, not the romanticized version of letting go, but the raw one, where you realize you spent years, maybe decades, trying to please, fit in, be accepted. And now you have to dismantle all of that without knowing what comes next. It feels like walking through a dark hallway where turning back is no longer an option, and the exit isn't in sight. This process is lonely, not because people vanish, but because you no longer connect with shallow conversations. And that disconnection stings. You begin to see that many of the bonds you kept were built on convenience, not truth. The most painful part, sometimes even you didn't realize it, that's where spirituality comes in, not as a comforting mantra, but as an anchor in the chaos. When the pain of self-awareness tightens, the ego wants to numb it with food, distraction, overwork, with relationships that feed old wounds. But the self calls for something else, to stay. Stay with what is, observe, breathe, don't react. That in itself is already a spiritual act, because most people run, but the ones who stay transform. And in that stillness, forgotten fragments of your soul begin to surface, pieces you buried in childhood just to avoid rejection. They return, sometimes in strange dreams, sometimes as emotional triggers or as unexplained sadness. And each fragment holds a key, a memory of who you were before shaping yourself to survive. That's when the journey deepens. When you understand that you're not reinventing yourself, you're remembering. Shadow work is profound, yes, but it's through that silent pain that the true reunion begins to take form. A reunion that doesn't happen all at once, but gradually, in the little things. And this reunion slowly changes how you live, because as that pain turns into awareness, it prepares you for a new level of responsibility, to integrate this new vision into your real life, into your body, your choices, your daily rhythm. Integrating the shadow into real life. Integrating your shadow isn't about locking yourself away on a spiritual retreat and waiting for answers to fall from the sky. It's a lot more grounded than that. It means paying attention to how you react in traffic, to the judgments that flare up in line at the grocery store, to the irritation with people who simply mirror back the parts of yourself you still refuse to accept. Carl Jung used to say the other is always the truest mirror of our unconscious, and life, in its infinite generosity, gives us these mirrors every single day. The problem is, the ego wants to keep up appearances. It doesn't want to admit it still feels envy, pride, jealousy, or the need to control. But integration requires peeling away the polish. So instead of feeling guilty for these reactions, start getting curious. If you feel envy, ask yourself, what does this person have that I gave up on in myself? If you feel anger, ask, what is this emotion protecting? Every emotion carries a hidden message. In practical terms, integrating the shadow can be as simple as writing. Have a notebook just for that. The journal of what I'd never say out loud. Use it to record the parts of you you'd usually deny, not to judge them, but to hold them. Another powerful tool is the mirror game. Whenever something or someone affects you, instead of reacting, ask what that situation is reflecting back about you. It might sound repetitive, but this kind of repetition is what trains your awareness. Because spirituality isn't about escaping reality, it's about expanding your perception of it. And the more you practice non-judgmental self-observation, the more attuned you become to your inner nuances. The persona begins to loosen. The ego learns it doesn't have to control everything, and that's when your relationships start to shift. Your conversations deepen, your conflicts become opportunities for clarity, but real integration also happens through the body. So much of what we've repressed doesn't live just in the mind. It's stored in our muscles, our breath, our posture. That's why practices like yoga, breath work, bioenergetics, or even a simple mindful walk can help release stuck emotional energy. A practical example. Take a 20-minute walk in silence, without music or distractions, just noticing how your body feels. At first, your mind will try to sabotage the moment. But little by little, you'll begin to hear parts of yourself that have been silent for years. That's embodied shadow work. And it's this kind of practice that prepares you to face life with more presence, more truth, more compassion. Because the shadow isn't an abstract idea. It's who you are when you're tired, under pressure, or rejected. And it's exactly in those moments that it shows you who you still have the potential to become. Life isn't about thinking. It's about doing. There are people who read every Carl Jung book, watch hours of content about ego, shadow work, and archetypes, and still remain stuck. Why? Because knowledge without action becomes distraction. And the ego loves that. It craves deep content, as long as it doesn't require real change. The mind can become a prison when it isn't followed by movement. Thinking is easy. Acting with awareness. That's where the magic happens. Spiritual life doesn't unfold through knowing about individuation. It shows up when you realize you've been avoiding a hard conversation for months, and still you pick up the phone and schedule that coffee. Courage doesn't live in your head, it lives in your steps. And those steps don't need to be big. One is enough. One no spoken with honesty. One boundary set with love. One different choice, even if you're scared. That's inner transformation happening in real time. The ego always prefers planning over risk. It wants guarantees to know everything will work out before even beginning. But the soul doesn't follow that logic. The self reveals itself in action when you leave theory and step into experience. Want a simple example? How many times have you said you wanted to change your routine but still fall asleep clinging to your phone? You say you want to reconnect with your spirituality, but only when you have time. You say you want to leave a toxic relationship, but you still respond "good morning" to avoid conflict. This isn't judgment. This is an invitation to understand that transformation doesn't happen when everything is perfect. It happens when you move even while imperfect. And here's the beauty of it. Every act of presence weakens the grip of your persona. Every real choice brings you back into alignment. That's how spirituality stops being a concept and becomes a way of being. And on this path, what matters is not how many ideas you collect, but how many of them you embody. Life doesn't respond to what you think. It responds to what you vibrate, what you choose, what you do. And doing isn't about hustle. It's about commitment. Some think acting means being productive, getting results. But true action comes from your center, not your anxiety. Sometimes taking action means turning off your phone for 2 hours. It means saying, "I don't know," with humility. Seeking professional help, admitting you're tired, stopping the study of shadow work and actually observing yourself with honesty. Little by little, what once felt confusing begins to align, because the self recognizes when you start moving. And that movement creates a magnetic shift, a new field that begins to attract what resonates with your soul, not with your mask. Find your personal path. One of the ego's biggest traps is believing your path has to look like someone else's, especially someone you admire. As if there were a sacred playbook for how spiritual life, awakening, or inner work should look. But the truth is, the real path is profoundly personal. Carl Jung once said that enlightenment doesn't come from imagining figures of light, but from making the darkness conscious. And because each person carries a unique kind of darkness, every journey is non-transferable. What works for one might be poison for another. The silence that heals one person might suffocate someone else. The solitude that awakens deep truths in one might trigger old wounds in another. That's why finding your path isn't about following a model. It's about listening to what pulses inside you, even if it contradicts trends or goes against what your group considers right. True spirituality is almost a silent act of rebellion. It's when you begin to say no to what everyone else says yes to, not out of defiance but from inner coherence. It's when you realize you no longer need external validation to live in peace. And that requires a level of listening that the ego doesn't enjoy. The ego craves belonging. The self, however, longs for authenticity. Finding your path means beginning to tell yourself, it's okay if no one understands. That is freedom. A practical example. Some people feel guilty because they can't meditate, but feel deeply connected while sweeping the floor in silence. That is meditation. Others feel centered while cooking, walking, painting, watching clouds drift by. These are legitimate ways to reconnect, but to walk them, you have to let go of comparison, because there is no map for the soul, only a compass. And that compass lives in your chest, not on your feed. Once you begin honoring your inner compass, something quietly magical begins to happen. Anxiety softens, because you stop chasing an ideal life and start living your life. And that, at its core, is individuation. It's when archetypes stop being abstract ideas and start being lived through you naturally. You start to recognize the healer in you, the warrior, the lover, the sage, not as roles to play, but as real parts of your psyche asking to be expressed. This changes everything. It shifts your choices, your routines, your relationships. It changes your voice, your walk, your gaze, because a personal path isn't about a destination, it's about presence. And the more present you become, the more things make sense, even when logic can't explain them. But there's always something that blocks this authentic movement. And paradoxically, that something might also be the key to your freedom: fear. Your fear is your true north. Fear is often seen as a weakness, as if being afraid were incompatible with spirituality or personal growth. But Carl Jung showed us something different. Fear is often a guide. It points precisely to the places where the ego is trying to maintain control and where the soul is asking to break through. What you fear the most often hides what you desire most deeply, but the ego distorts that desire. It turns the longing for love into a fear of getting hurt. The desire to be seen becomes the fear of exposure. The urge to create becomes the fear of failure. And that's when you freeze, without realizing you're standing at the edge of a portal, a sign, an invitation. Fear is where the persona trembles and the shadow begins to reveal itself. And when you choose to move through that fear, even trembling, even without guarantees, something realigns. It's as if the universe whispers, now you're ready to live in truth. Facing your fear doesn't mean acting without it. It means acting with full presence despite it. And in practice, that can take many forms. Start small. Make a list of your most recurring fears, then pick one and approach it gently. For example, if you're afraid of public speaking, don't start with a lecture. Start by talking to someone new, sending a voice note, or sharing one personal idea. The key is to break the cycle of paralysis. Afraid to end a relationship, write a letter you'll never send, just to understand your feelings. Afraid you're not good enough. Ask yourself where that belief came from. Often it's inherited. It's not even yours. That's what shadow work is, treating fear as a teacher, not an enemy. Because beneath that fear lives your most authentic self, and nothing terrifies the ego more than the freedom that comes after that. On the journey of self-knowledge, fear is inevitable, but it's also a sign that you're moving in the right direction. People on autopilot feel boredom, not fear. Those who are waking up to themselves feel the ground shake, and that's okay. It's part of the process. The important thing is not to confuse fear with intuition. Intuition whispers with calm, fear shouts with urgency. Intuition guides, fear imprisons, until you choose to listen to what's behind it. And what's behind it, almost always, is a call to expand, a part of you that longs to come out of hiding, a voice that's been silenced for years, and when you start walking in that direction, everything shifts. Life begins to move in your favor, not because things get easier, but because you are more aligned. And when you walk with fear beside you, not as an enemy, but as a compass, what once felt like darkness begins to reveal a spark, a light that exists because there is shadow. Light only exists because darkness exists. It's fascinating how so many people want to live in the light, but reject the darkness within themselves, as if it were possible to access wholeness without first walking through the chaos. Carl Jung was surgical in his truth. No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's the very point most people try to avoid. Light is not the opposite of shadow. It's born from it. It comes through the recognition of pain, of doubt, of anger, envy, and fear. When you welcome all of that without trying to escape, you start to see that the light isn't waiting at the end of the tunnel. It's been inside you the whole time, just waiting to be seen through contrast. That's why the hardest moments of life are often the most transformative. They aren't punishments, they're portals, cracks through which the light can enter. This craving to live only in positivity creates a kind of toxic spirituality, where every natural human emotion is treated as a failure. But suppressing pain doesn't heal it. It just pushes it into the unconscious. And what gets repressed returns as symptoms: anxiety, panic attacks, emotional burnout, repetitive relationship patterns. The real spiritual work is about accepting your full self, recognizing that within you lives a hero and a saboteur, a healer and someone deeply wounded, a sage and someone lost. This isn't contradiction, it's humanity. The light that transforms isn't the one that denies the shadow, but the one that integrates it. So next time you find yourself in a dark moment, don't blame yourself. Ask instead, what is this darkness trying to show me? Sometimes it's just your soul asking you to stop running. Sometimes it's the beginning of an awakening you didn't even see coming. And if you really pay attention, you'll notice something. The most luminous people you know are the ones who've walked through the darkest valleys. They don't shine because they never suffered. They shine because they survived, because they've transmuted pain into presence, trauma into wisdom, shadow into compassion. That light has a name: consciousness. And it's born when you stop fighting your shadow and start dialoguing with it. When you understand that spirituality is not about deleting parts of yourself, but about bringing light to them. That's how you break the cycle. That's how you stop repeating patterns and start writing a new story. A story where light and shadow dance together, where you allow yourself to be whole, even if that wholeness feels terrifying at first. Because to live authentically is at its core a courageous choice. And that courage only becomes real when you understand that the meaning of life isn't in reaching a destination, it's in moving forward with presence. Meaning is movement, not a destination. Many people spend their entire lives waiting for that final moment of clarity, believing that one day everything will finally make sense, as if purpose were a finish line marked by fireworks and fanfare. But the truth, as Carl Jung suggested, is that meaning doesn't lie in reaching something. It lives in moving through life with presence. The soul doesn't want you to find yourself. It wants you to move, because truth is revealed through movement. It's in the repetition of small acts, in the quiet courage to keep going even when you're uncertain, that meaning begins to appear. The self doesn't show up when everything is resolved. It appears when you choose to act even with doubts, to keep going even with fear, to choose yourself even without applause. This journey isn't about arriving, it's about becoming. It's about discovering who you're growing into as you walk the path. The ego craves stability. It wants final answers, predictable plans, the certainty that everything will be okay. But spirituality, the kind that's shaped by stumbles and silence, teaches the opposite. To live is to dance with the unknown. And that's not chaos. That's art. That's flow. That's trust. Meaning isn't something you stumble upon like a key. It's something you build step by step, choice by choice. It's born when you stop waiting for the right moment and start living fully now. The archetype of the wanderer, so present in myths and dreams, symbolizes this truth. The one who doesn't seek a destination, but an experience. Who understands that every conversation, every loss, every rebirth is a bridge. And every bridge crossed with courage lights another candle in the soul. The great trap is thinking you'll only have value once you get there, wherever there is. But your value is in who you are becoming along the way, in who you choose to be when no one is watching, in how you hold yourself when you're not being praised. That's real meaning. A meaning that can't be proven but can be felt. It pulses in your chest when you fall asleep at peace with your choices. It echoes in the eyes of someone you impacted without even realizing it. It shines through when you understand that even without all the answers, you're living with truth. And maybe that's exactly what the shadow was trying to show you all along, that there is no destination, only the crossing. Only the movement, and in that movement your soul expands, even when everything around you is quiet. Agora aqui está o encerramento e chamada para o próximo episódio. Now that you've come this far, let me ask you honestly, how many times have you looked in the mirror and seen a stranger? How many times have you caught yourself smiling on the outside, while silently begging to be truly seen? Maybe deep down, you already knew that what you were missing wasn't a new goal. It was the reunion with the parts of yourself you exiled. But what if today is the beginning of a new passage? What if your shadow, the part you've hidden for years, is actually the key to your awakening? Are you ready to hear what your shadow has to say? Or will you keep looking for answers in the same places that only offer repetition? If this video stirred something in you, imagine what could unfold when you begin exploring the next episodes of this journey. Because here, every video is a piece of your soul's puzzle. And if you come back every week, same time, you'll start to remember what the world made you forget, who you really are. So go ahead and subscribe now, turn on the notifications, and get your coffee ready, because the next episode will reveal why so many spiritually evolved people are still stuck. And maybe, just maybe, that answer will completely change the course of your life.